Ernie, thanks for joining me today. It is great to be with you again, and I'm so happy to introduce you to our Cars and Culture audience.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being with me. Let me start with four names: Amazon, Google, Facebook, Carvana. Incredible.
That sounded good.
Didn't it sound good? Carvana's one of the youngest companies to be listed in the Fortune 500, tied with Facebook, incidentally, and has managed an annual growth rate of 42% without a single layoff or furlough throughout the pandemic. When somebody throws those names in front of you, how does that make you feel in the comparison point?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Lucky is maybe the first word that pops to mind. I think we started 8.5 years ago. We launched 8.5 years ago. We started maybe a year before that. And we felt like we had an opportunity to build something really big. And we felt like we had great people that were surrounding us. But I think the truth of building any company is just that it's a long, hard journey. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to mess up and fall down along the way. And I think that we have stumbled a little bit here and there, but we've avoided big falls. And I think we've been lucky on several occasions to avoid those big falls. And I think the result of that and the great people that have been here since the beginning and the great people we've added along the way and the fact that they've all got energy to come in every day and work as hard as they do to try to build something great, I think has gotten us to a place where we're in unbelievable company. I mean, those companies that you listed are obviously incredible companies that are in a way different spot today than we are, but to have had a moment in time when we kind of crossed over and kind of find ourselves in that same group is really, really cool. And I think it generates a feeling that we need to keep running really fast to kind of live up to the potential that we've got. But I think we've got the team to do it. And I think if we find a little more luck along the way, we've got a shot.
You said during your second quarter earnings call, when so much good news came out, landmark news, first quarter over 100,000 in retail sales, automotive sales, first quarter over $3 billion, first ever quarter of positive net income. You said it was a landmark to some extent. It was described that way. Could you have imagined when you were one of those ambitious kids, as you described 8.5 years ago, that 8.5 years later, that the landmark would be there? And I know you don't want to be complacent. That's for sure. You're just getting going.
So I think the truth to that question, extremely arrogantly, is probably yes. We could imagine that landmark, and the reason I think is because if you can't imagine that landmark, then you would never try, right? Like you'd never start at the beginning if you couldn't imagine getting there. So I do think we imagined it. I think at that time we were a bunch of ambitious kids and we did have a lot to learn and there was so much that we didn't yet know. And I sometimes think, to be totally honest, that not knowing those things was an advantage because it allowed us to imagine, the day that we just had, and to imagine there was a lot less standing between where we were at that time and that day than really was. And that kind of, kicked us off down the track. And I think, so much of, I think, ultimately being lucky enough to be successful is about being dumb enough to take the first step. And I think because we knew so little, we were dumb enough. And then I think, since then we've pushed really hard and like I said, we've been surrounded by great people and we've been lucky to get to this spot. But I don't know, we could imagine it then. And I do think that's arrogant, but I think that that's maybe a hallmark of anyone who starts a company.
Well, you have to have that kind of ambition, otherwise you wouldn't do it, right? Or you've got to see that the road winds that way.
Definitely, and to me, I think we saw it, and we thought the opportunity was there, and we thought that it'd be easier to grab than we now realize that it was. But that's what caused us to kick it off, and that's what led to us being here today.
For those who might not know the model as well, I mean the technology behind the model, a used car vending machine, is in and of itself pretty remarkable. You also search for and vet used cars on the company's site. You either have it delivered to your door in as little as 24 hours, or you collect the new car to you at one of those 28 fully automated coin-operated contraptions, as Fortune wrote. And then the vehicle's dispensed on demand, completely prepped, ready for your ride home. A pretty simple concept. But it wasn't your first concept. You actually failed first in your first idea. Talk to me a little bit about luderang.
Um, so I'll give you a brief description. This was around the time that Groupon was starting, and so there was kind of all this buzz around, trying to drive consumers to merchants in the real world that they might not have otherwise visited, and what kind of value could be generated in that. And at the same time, Yelp was taking off, and so we thought that if we could generate kind of or get access to a data set of credit card transactions, that we could build models to predict what are merchants in the real world, whether it's food or anything else, that any given consumer would probably like but hadn't yet been to. And then instead of offering these really big discounts, could we go to merchants around, and we started in Phoenix, we go to merchants around Phoenix and get them to offer small discounts, maybe 5%, 10%, but just small inducements that would get someone to try something they'd never tried before. And then could we kind of split up the benefit with the merchant of driving new customers to them. And that was kind of the initial idea. And there's actually since been a company called Cardalytics that did it successfully. They partnered up with a bunch of the different credit card companies to get access to the data directly, and then they market through statements, and they've done a good job with that. And they launched, I don't know if it was a little before or a little after, but about the same time that we launched. But they were successful and we weren't. And I think through that experience, we learned a lot. And one thing that we learned that I think is really interesting, and it's a mistake that I think a lot of people make when they assess businesses in retrospect, is you assume that the idea is where all the value is. And I think that this is a case where we had an idea that we thought was pretty good, and the idea ultimately worked. It just worked for someone else, right? And so I think what you learn there is we just weren't good enough to get it done. I think there's a million reasons why that was the case, and I do think luck plays a role in all these things. So things didn't break our way, but I think we learned a lot about what's hard about trying to build something, about being smart about how much you bite off when you're first starting, picking the directions that you run, and ideally picking directions where you have some pre-existing knowledge, so you're not trying to learn everything all at once. So I think that failure, which was incredibly painful at the time, we went through all the iterations of investing our personal money, and then it not working, and believing that we were just about to fix it, and then putting more money in, and just getting in deeper than we thought, and then having to have all the tough conversations with people that had worked really hard with us to try to build it, and just basically just having to come clean with this thing that we thought we could do, we couldn't do, and we're out of money and this doesn't work. And going through that experience, I think, taught us a lot and taught me a lot. And I think without that experience, I think it would have been a lot harder to find the success that we've had with Carvana. So I think at the time it was brutally painful, but I think with the benefit of hindsight, it was lucky that we went through that as well.
You went through it with Ben Houston, who you met as a sophomore. You were both sophomores at Stanford. You were how old when you lost your money and tried but failed? How old were you then?
When would that have been? That was maybe 2009. I was probably 27, give or take, 28.
Okay. So you're 27. You've tried luderang. Nobody knows about Carvana. It's not created yet. So what'd you do next?
Well, going back to arrogance and being dumb, I had already started Carvana. So luderang started before, maybe a year before. And Ben, who's now the COO of Carvana, was someone that I met in college and I had a tremendous amount of respect for, and I knew was just an incredibly capable person. And so when the idea for luderang started popping around, but I kind of knew that I had a day job, and then I also wanted to do this other thing called Carvana at the time that it wasn't named that yet, but I wanted to do that. I reached out to Ben and said, hey, do you want to come run this thing? And at the time, I had my day job, and then basically from 5 p.m. to 2 in the morning every day, I would go to the office and work with Ben, and he would be there all day, from 8 a.m. through 5, and then he'd be with me until 2 in the morning, and we would try to kind of build that. So we were doing that. We went through that failure together, and probably halfway through, or maybe 3/4 of the way through, failing with luderang, I was kicking off Carvana and Ernies as well, because again, I was dumb enough to think that I could do all of it, and I didn't appreciate how hard it was going to be. But then that ended up being lucky, because the setup for Carvana, which I'm sure we'll get into later, was a more forgiving setup that made it easier to find success early, and gave us a shot to learn more of the lessons that we had to learn along that path. And when luderang then failed, it ended up being really easy to say, hey, well, listen, I've still got all the faith in the world in this person. That's not shaken even a little bit. I think that if anything, it's grown because we understand more now that we failed together. And so then we kind of pivoted into Carvana once Luderang didn't work.
What was the day job that you mentioned?
So I worked at Drive Time, which is an auto retail and finance company. That's a company that was started by my dad, and I interned in that business or predecessor businesses from the time I was probably 15 years old, or maybe even a little bit younger. And then after all that, I went to college, and then I went and worked in New York for a couple of years, and for family reasons needed to move back. And when I moved back, ended up working in that business, and then in an effort to build my own identity, was trying to build Luderang and then Carvana, and so that was kind of the way those things are all connected.
And with Carvana, you kind of looked around and you said with Ben, you were trying to focus on why people left car dealerships with a stomach ache. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so I think that's what it reduces to, and so I think there are many car dealers that do a great job, and so I don't mean to paint with too broad a brush, right? But there's no doubt about the fact that the industry has a reputation that's not great, and it's one of the worst. I mean, that's just it's the butt of jokes for a reason, and so you have to then ask yourself, is there something about the product itself that makes it very hard to give a customer an experience that they're excited about, or is there something about the way that it's done? And I think when we were trying to investigate that question, given the experience that I had interning in that business and similar businesses earlier in my life, I was never convinced that it was inherent to the product. It always felt like it was the way the business was done, and then you have to start to ask yourself, why is business done that way, and why is it leading to all these things? I think those are complicated questions with a bunch of things that we think we arrived at in terms of insights, but we weren't convinced that it had to be that way. And to me, there's so many businesses today that are built, and businesses in general, I don't mean to say today, I think across time, that are built with a business model purpose. We're going to shoot for these kinds of margins. We're going to be this kind of business structure. When we were launching Carvana, the complete craze was marketplaces, and the only way you could be successful is you got to build a business that's a marketplace. But to me, the truth of any great business over time is that you can't start with some business feature. You have to start with a customer and what the customer cares about, and you have to have something that's just pretty simple and human that you're trying to resolve. And to me, the simplest way to articulate that was a stomach ache. Customers walk out of buying a car, and all too often, they wonder if they paid the right price. They wonder if they bought the right car. They're nervous about explaining, to Uncle Car Guy, the deal that they just got, because they're afraid that he's going to explain to them the 5 things they did wrong. And so, this process of getting, one of the biggest products that you buy, that you're incredibly excited about, that you've thought about for months and months before you did it, and so should be like this really exciting life moment, it ends up being a point of anxiety. And I think that was the route that we saw, and we thought there was an opportunity to make that better, and that's what kicked off the idea for Carvana.
Yeah, you knew that customer preferences were changing. You knew that technology was evolving, and you knew that the traditional way of doing it was changing less, right? So there was white space.
Exactly, and to me, that's the way that we always try to think about innovation, in anything. I think that the best possible business model for anything is a function of what are customer preferences at the time, and then what are technologies that are available, and are we going to be able to build something with these new technologies that matches these new preferences. And I think that one of the great indications of opportunity is if an offering that customers face has not changed for a long time, and the customer preferences have, and the technology has, that suggests that there's probably a new way to do it, because things have changed a lot since the original business model was designed, and so we thought there was a lot of opportunity there.
Did you emulate any particular companies as you were crafting this idea? Sure.
I mean, I think you grow up and you get exposure to all the companies that are the great companies at the time. So you're paying attention to Apple and Steve Jobs, and you're listening to the way that he thought about innovation, which was much less about testing and iterating and way more about imagining. And you're seeing Jeff Bezos building Amazon, and his constant focus on customers and on scale, and a willingness to invest in fixed expense to build lower variable expense and better customer experiences. And at the time, Elon Musk was just starting to be, kind of become what he is in kind of the public mind today. And you're kind of seeing things there. I don't think, unfortunately, we share anything in common with him. I think we fall way short of him in every measurable category. But you're paying attention to all these things, and you're trying to learn from them. And so I think, of course, those companies served as a backdrop when we thought about what we thought the right solution for customers was.
So bottom line, you wanted to create an experience for the customer to pick up the car in person. And the initial effort came in the form of a garage with glass doors and a keypad. And the customer could get the car a day faster than by delivery and provide a fun reveal, if you will, right? Their first garage, correct me if I'm wrong, about $150,000 to produce, and
Yeah,
jokingly called a vending machine.
exactly. Well, so and let me even take one step back from that. So just to really quick kind of describe the business that we were trying to build. So we talked about this root of resolve, the customer stomach ache. And then I think when you think about in any retail business, like what drives a customer experience, a customer is looking for a great deal, right? So you need to build a business model that enables you to give them a great deal. They want to have a broad selection. They might not articulate it as a broad selection. They may because it's fun to browse, but even if they don't articulate it as a broad selection, they may articulate it as I want you to have the car that I want. But that requires that you as a business have a great selection. And then they want to have a fun and easy experience. And so, what we set out to do is we said, okay, taking all these lessons that we had learned from all these other businesses that we had watched, how do we build a business model that gives customers those things, leveraging modern technology, because that's what modern customer preferences are looking for. And so we settled on, let's have centralized inventory, let's have this inventory available nationwide, so customers can go to a website and they can buy it. They're going to give up a test drive. But by giving up the test drive, now all of a sudden we can have nationwide inventory available on a single website. We can have lower prices. We can deliver to them. We can let them have a 7-day return policy. We can make the transaction really simple where it's self-service through the entire website, so we don't have the traditional expenses of a dealership, and that will enable us to offer lower prices. And so that was kind of like the initial goal. And it wasn't about e-commerce. It wasn't about selling cars online. It was about how do we use modern technology to achieve these consumer goals of better selection, better price, better experience. And in doing all that, one of the things we had to build was a logistics network to then get a car that had been purchased online to a customer. And so we were delivering them to a customer's door as soon as the next day. But then we kind of quickly realized, okay, well, to do that as cost effectively as possible, which is really important here, we then need to have some location where we're staging cars when inside of the city where the customer lives before we deliver to the customer, because we don't want to deliver from our centralized inspection centers nationwide. We want to deliver into a city to a centralized location and then do last mile from there. And so we were already creating hubs inside of cities, and our first one was in Atlanta. And then we kind of went to this place where we said, okay, well, this last mile costs us money and it takes us a little bit of time. What if we could get customers to come pick up? Maybe they want to do that, maybe they don't, but let's test and let's try to figure it out, because then we can save them even more money and we can get them the car even faster. And if those things are important to them, then maybe that's a good direction for us to go. So as you said, all we did is we invested around $150,000, kind of putting glass garage doors up, and they had a little pin on the outside. And when a customer selected pickup, we would send them an email, and that email had a pin, and so they'd type in, whatever it was, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the garage door would go up, and they would take receipt of their car, and we would be there to explain the features of the car and everything to them. And so that was kind of this experience, and our marketing team decided to call it a vending machine, which was what it was. To me, it was a passing thought, and it was clever, great. Let's call it that, and let's see where this all goes. But we were not a hot Silicon Valley company with venture capital investors that had a lot of attention from the media prior to that point. We could not get anyone to cover us to save our lives, and we were trying so hard to get any coverage, because for a startup, media coverage is one of the only ways to get your word out that's costless, right? To me, that's one of the advantages that Silicon Valley has that a lot of the rest of the country doesn't have, is there's an entire media apparatus that's sitting there to cover startups that
Right.
gets the early adopter population exposure to these companies early on. And so, we were looking for equivalence, right? And we couldn't find it. And then we called this vending machine, or we called this apparatus the vending machine. And all of a sudden, we were on the homepage of Yahoo. And I remember I came home that night, and I went on Google Analytics, because I couldn't believe that there were like 42 people or whatever it was on our website at the same time. And I went on my iPhone, and I basically zoomed in to real-time analytics, so I could just see the numbers, because they're clicking up and down by 1 or 2 every couple seconds. And I blew it up, and I plugged it in so the screen wouldn't turn off. And I kind of put it at an angle so I could see it while I sat with my wife and pretended like I was watching the show that we were watching. And really, I just watched 42 turn to 43, turn to 41, and I couldn't believe how exciting that was.
Right.
But that was the first time that we really got a little bit of coverage.
So then you identify an engineering firm in Germany to actually build you a vending machine.
Yeah, so I think with that raging success of 42 people jumping on the website, we knew we had something. But then we also knew that we weren't yet, necessarily living up to what a vending machine really could be. So we realized, okay, there's actually a fundamental reason for this, and people love cool things. And I think sometimes in business we can forget that, right? We can focus too much on rationality and numbers, but people love things that are cool and fun, right? If I'm going to buy a car once every 5 or 6 years, having an awesome experience that I can tell my friends about, that's attractive. And then me telling my friends about it economically works out. And so we had this nugget of an idea that then kind of we realized had legs because we had the success of being on Yahoo's homepage and seeing all these customers come to our site. So we jumped online and started Googling, how could we build a real car vending machine? And it probably took us a week and 100 phone calls to figure out where to go. And then I jumped on a red eye out to Germany and spent literally, I think, 14 hours on the ground with this company, and we came up with a deal to build one, and we made it happen.
Were they the ones that also did the Volkswagen headquarters in Wolfsburg, where they have a very similar concept?
They were not that same company, but they were a company with similar capabilities.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the growth story is rooted in a single concept to which nearly every human can relate. Your next customer could be your mom. Is that right, Ernie?
That's so. I think as you build a business, culture is an important thing when you're building a business, and I think when you're doing anything in life, I think culture is an important thing. But all too often, it's not articulated. It's not necessary to be articulated, because if you're in a group of people, you establish your social norms and you have the ways that you interact, and people kind of come into your friend group that are somewhat similar and find the same things funny and interact in the same way, and avoid things that you collectively find as awkward, whatever it is, but you have a culture, you just don't articulate it. When you start a company, that company starts to have a culture, and that culture is a function of just the initial people that started. And you've got the things that you believe in, and you've got the ways that you interact, and you start to just naturally attract people that are similar, and you also start to influence people that come into the company to think in similar ways, because that group of people interacts in a certain way. And so that culture, it naturally starts to evolve, but you don't label it. You don't name it anything. You don't do anything on purpose. You just kind of do you, right? And culture emerges. But then as you start to get bigger, you start to realize all of a sudden there's so many people coming into this that it's evolving fast enough to where if we're not doing these things on purpose, if we're not saying what's important to us and what drives us and what led to the initial insights that allowed us to build this thing, then we're just going to kind of disperse, and our culture will end up being the sum of all the people that we brought in that wasn't as purposeful as we wanted it to be, and we might drift in terms of what's important to us collectively. So we really wanted to articulate what was important so that as we grew, we could keep bringing people in that were like-minded. And I think, I'm kind of a nerd, for lack of a better description, and so I like to write down all these like conceptual thoughts about what's important to us and why, and so I tried to write it all down, and worked with Ben and with Ryan Keaton, who's another founder, and we kind of wrote all these important things down. And then we kind of realized, like, no one's going to care about these dumb concepts that we've put down. So how do we take these ideas, which we think are good ideas, we think are important to driving the culture that we want to build over time, but how do we make these influential to people? And so we ended up saying, let's treat this like it's a marketing campaign, but it's going to be an internal marketing campaign. And let's take these ideas and let's wrap them in something that makes them human and accessible, and let's make it something that we think people will remember. And so we brought in our marketing team, and they spent months on trying to wrap these together. And one of them that I think just always sticks and is probably the most powerful is our next customer could be your mom. And I just think it's hard to generate a cleaner description of what we're trying to build than our next customer could be your mom, right? That means a lot to people, and they know what it means in so many ways. It means you have to treat this person fairly. It means you want the experience to be easy. It means afterwards you want them to be excited about it, and you want them to be proud of you for what they just went through. So there's a lot that gets conveyed there, and it's so simple and accessible. And so I think the marketing team did a great job changing our dumb, high-minded concepts into something that actually resonated.
Well, it's one of the 7 guiding principles of Carvana. The other 6, we're all in this together. There are no sidelines. Be brave, zag forward, stay scrappy, and don't be a dick.
It's don't be a Richard, but
Oh.
you shortened it. You saved yourself some time there. You saved yourself a syllable. Good work.
And they were, and it is definitely has been the guiding principle. And let's talk about culture, because I want to go back to the Word document, because it started with a Word document, right? And you sat down with Ben and with Ryan, and you knew that you were working hard. You knew that you could have fun at a breakneck pace as well. But that formalization of the culture, that loose draft that became the value statement, and Ben's on one side of you, Ryan's on the other, and you created this blueprint for everybody. And from that point on, you knew exactly who you wanted in your company, correct?
I think that's right. So I think the one thing that I would maybe edit, I think we knew before, but we didn't know how to say it to everyone else in a way that would enable them to absorb it, and to make sure that when they were bringing people into their groups, that they'd be bringing people that were like-minded. And so I think what values really are, it's an exercise in communication that enables you to then multiply the things that you think are important across more people more quickly. And so I think we knew who we were ahead of time. I think we knew what we wanted to build, but I think we couldn't articulate it in a way that was going to allow us to magnify it. And so I think that's what that exercise was really about.
There's not much out there, Ernie, about you. Not many people know a little bit more of the personal side of you. Tell me a little bit about you. You're a great athlete. You're an amazing pickleball player. Is that right?
That's important. That's a big one.
But tell me something else about you.
Oh man. Well, so I don't quite know where to start there. I've got 3 kids and an awesome wife, and I think I've got these days my life is those 3 kids. My wife, our extended family, and Carvana. So I think there's not much more about me that's that interesting, to be honest. I wish there were.
Your dad's
I'm
huge.
not too bad at pickleball.
Well, I also understand that when you go to one of your facilities and somebody challenges you to a basketball game, you can pretty much post up or drain a 3 as well, right?
Well, that's because I can't dunk anymore because I'm getting old and the knees are weak. But no, I do have fun going out to the facilities and trying to do my best competing with whoever's out there and wants to compete in anything. I enjoy doing that.
You have a very close relationship with your father, right?
I do.
How important is he in the building of Carvana for you? Not from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective.
So, I mean, important, and in a lot of ways. I'll articulate one way that I think is important for anyone who's listening and is trying to decide what they're capable of. And this is going to end up feeling like maybe it's less of a absolute compliment than it is, because it's intended to be a compliment to him for sure. And so when we get to the end, you'll see it. But I think my dad was lucky enough he was an entrepreneur and he took a lot of risks. And with the benefit of hindsight and now hearing the stories, I know that he failed several times and that he was successful in the end. Growing up, I had no idea about his successes or his failures. He was just dad, and we were just kind of living our life. And I at different points in time, we were not very well off financially, and we were really well off financially, and I had no idea. And I think that was a big thing that he gave me, or that my parents gave me, that I think was valuable. And then as I got a little older and I started to realize that he was pretty successful, I think I saw people laugh at his jokes too hard and nod their heads too much whenever he said something, and I realized, like, this human being that I've known my whole life and is no more than a human being. He's great. I love my dad. He's a really smart guy, but he's just a human being. He, to other people, was representing this level of success that you could see them look at him like he was something different from them. And I would just say, but he's just a guy, right? He's just dad. And I think that was also a huge gift, because what it made me realize is you can do it, right? Like the most successful people in the world are just people. That's all they are. And I think if you're lucky enough to get exposure to people that are that successful, you can realize that. And I think if you're not lucky enough to be close to people that are that successful, you can think they might have something you don't. And I think, belief in yourself is a big unlocking mechanism. It makes it so it's possible to try things. And if you don't jump, then you never succeed. And so I think that that gave me the confidence to jump. Him being a human gave me the confidence to jump.
He lives right next door to you, doesn't he? And there's a fire pit that you can gather around at the end of the night and talk about the workday. Is that correct?
So I mean, the story is, I guess we're jumping all the way in there. Story is, the house that I currently live at, when I grew up, I used to babysit for the kids that lived at this house. And so when we moved back to Phoenix, the family that had lived here was selling their house, and they reached out and offered to sell it to us. And my wife and I knew we were about to have kids, and thought it would be great to be next to my parents and the kids' grandparents. And so we bought the house, and so we are now kitty corner to my parents, which has been really great for a million reasons. And they're great. They're great grandparents, and they're also great in the sense that they want to be around, but they also know that they're not supposed to show up unannounced. So they give us our space when we need it, but they're around when we need them too.
Your team is scrappy. You love that word, right? And they're highly motivated. How do you keep everyone motivated after enjoying such an incredible level of success?
I think the most successful people are motivated by the pursuit. And I think that to find the most success, you have to be motivated by the pursuit. And I think it's about identifying people that find their motivation in that way. I think I don't want to pass judgment on different motivations, but different people are motivated in different ways. And I think some are motivated by the goal. And for those, I think it's harder when you achieve a goal to stay motivated. And some, I think, are inherently motivated to do more. And it doesn't matter where you are. It's that pursuit of improvement that drives you. And I think if you find those people, and I think if you build a culture around that, because I think you can influence people to be that way, even if they don't start that way, then I think you can keep moving. And I think that's what, success is. Different people pursue different things, and that's fine. So again, I don't want to even make it sound like success needs to be the thing that everyone chases. But I think if you want to achieve something, putting yourself at that thing 100% all the time and running as fast as you possibly can is how you separate. We all only have so much time, and the harder you run and the more relentless you are, the more you can achieve. But if you pause, you've got a fixed amount of time, and so you're giving up some of what you could be doing. And I think we think that we've got a really cool opportunity, and it's a business opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to influence people positively. We've got when we sell a car to a customer, we save them about $1,000. We save them about 4 hours, versus going to a dealership. And some customers prefer to do it the other way, but a lot of customers prefer that, and that's cool, right? Our mission, we've articulated this mission if we want to change the way people buy cars. We're motivated by this fact that aside from building a great business, which is exciting and does motivate us, a byproduct of our business is that all of our customers are saving all this money. We sold 100,000 cars in the latest quarter. You save all those customers $1,000 each. That's $100 million that got put back in the pockets of your customers.
Yeah.
It's 400,000 hours that you gave back to people to spend with their family. So that's cool. And so we want to go, chase that, and we want to go make the most of that. And so, we want to keep going. And I don't think we want to slow down just because of any given milestone that we cross.
Who have been your mentors to date, and what peers do you admire?
I think, to me, the word mentor it's about influence, right? It's this question of who influences you.
Who influences you, yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And I think a Of course, I've been influenced by the books I've read and the people I've seen and people that have had a tremendous amount of success. But I think the truth is we're probably shaped more by the people that we're closer to than by the people that we read about. And so, we talked about my dad earlier. I think that he's had a huge influence on me. I think, my freshman college roommate who now works at Carvana, he's had a tremendous influence on me. I was a public school kid that thought of myself as a jock and couldn't believe when I got into Stanford, and then I went and sat on my bed in my dorm room, and the first thing I asked my freshman roommate was, what was your SAT score? Because I was afraid I was going to be the dumbest kid at Stanford. And he told me he got a 1600, and I was about to punch him because he represented all the things I was insecure about. But then spending time with him and just getting exposure to the way he thought about the world was really influential for me. And so, that's not someone that you probably know or have heard about, but he was tremendously influential. I think we've talked about the co-founders of Carvana. They've been incredibly influential to me. I think the CEO of Drive Time, who I worked for when I was at Drive Time, was really influential for me. And he was influential for me because he was so different than I was, and he was very effective. And it made me realize the power of kind of different kinds of approaches, and made me appreciate things that I didn't previously appreciate. So those are maybe some of the people that I think have had a lot of influence over me, and then all the ones that you'd expect in terms of the big, flashy, successful entrepreneurs that we all know.
You have had virtually zero, perhaps since inception, zero executive team or board departures since the IPO. So you're keeping all those influential people around you at all times as well. That in and of itself, Ernie, is a huge accomplishment, isn't it?
I do think that's a huge part of our success. And I think, you always hear, well, I don't know if everyone else always heard, I always heard this advice that you should never kind of do business with friends, right? That's a mistake. And the truth is, our initial group that we started Carvana with, we were friends before. But I think, in my opinion, that ended up being a real strength because we knew each other deeply and we respected each other and we trusted each other and we knew one another's strengths and weaknesses, and it put us in a spot where I think that we could cut through all the nonsense that happens sometimes when you're sitting in a room trying to argue about which direction to go and no one's really saying exactly what they think because they're trying to politically dance around the subject and kind of manage relationships. We could just go. And I think because we could just go, we've been really successful. And I think that the fact that we have those relationships that enable us to just go and that we don't spend time dancing around things, I think have kept us together as well. So I think that's been a big deal. And I think that we were lucky in that way. And I don't think I knew ahead of time that would be the case. So I think that's another area we've been lucky.
Your CFO, Mark Jenkins, also plays a large operational role, which is different than most companies. Can you describe his skill set and maybe the unusual role that he plays?
Mark's one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. He plays a huge role at Carvana. He's obviously CFO, so he does all the things you'd expect out of a CFO. He knows the numbers better than anybody. He's also really effective strategically. He's incredible analytically. A lot of our most sophisticated analytical functions report up to him. And he's very capable as well understanding people. And I think that combination is really rare. It's hard to be so logical and also so kind of empathetic and aware of how people think and respond to things. And I think it makes him a very unique talent. So he plays a huge role inside Carvana, and we're extremely lucky to have had him throughout this ride. I think I first met Mark, I was still at Drive Time, and he was doing his PhD thesis on drive time data, and he flew out and I was kind of the person that was tasked with, walking him around and explaining the business to him and getting him access to the data. And that first night, we went out for drinks afterwards and talked for, it must have been 4 hours. And I knew right then that I wanted to work with him, in any capacity possible, and basically immediately started begging him at that time to come to drive time. And it took some time to convince him that all of it made sense, but it was very obvious very quickly that he was a unique talent, and that's definitely played out.
Ernie, there are numerous adjacencies to consider as Carvana grows and changes. Which ones are most appealing to you?
So, I think what you got to be careful about as an entrepreneur and someone who's dumb enough to jump the first time, everything's always appealing to you. And so you've got to be smart about prioritizing what's smart to take on and what's not smart to take on, because everything ends up being harder than you think when you embark down that path. And so the way that we think about what the opportunities are is we think about what do our customers need and what do our customers want. When they buy a car, there's a lot that goes along with that, right? And so the very obvious ones are they're probably trading in a car, they need financing, and they probably want a warranty for their car. But there's a lot of other things too that they need. And so I think when we are prioritizing what those opportunities are, we try to think about what do our customers need and want the most. And then we try to start with those things and build them out. When we think about trying to prioritize inside of the business, when you've got a fixed amount of throughput that you can push through the system at any point in time to get things done, I think at this point we're still roughly 1% market share nationwide. So we need to make sure that while there's all kinds of opportunities that we're incredibly well positioned to take advantage of, we also need to stay focused on ensuring that we take this thing that we do so well that has enabled us to build this really cool business and to save 100,000 customers, $1,000 in 4 hours, and just keep scaling that, because scaling that is a lot of work and takes a lot of attention. So that's priority number one. Where we go, from here and the other priorities, I think we'll wait to roll out our different offerings over time, and we'll probably talk more about them then. But we're aware of them, and I think we just have to be disciplined in how we take them on.
And most importantly, I know customer experience is such a hallmark of the Carvana process. How do you ensure that you still have a great customer experience with 100% plus growth?
It's hard. Focus. The value of our next customer could be your mom, and then articulating that to everyone across the company, and hoping that it resonates in a way that then shows up in all the little things happening to make that customer's experience better. The person who's picking out the car and buying it, maybe they're seeing pictures online or whatever, they're paying a little more attention than they might otherwise. And the person who's fixing the car at the inspection centers and standing underneath it at a lift is something catches the corner of their eye, and they kind of walk back and make sure they get that right. And the person that's delivering the car, taking the moment to experience that fun moment with the customer where they're getting a car that they get once every 6 years, instead of it turning into, okay, but I've got 2 more deliveries or 3 more deliveries I got to get to today, so it's just, you're a number to me. Those things are all really, really important. When a customer calls in, has questions, and they talk to an advocate, that advocate, taking the time to really figure out what that customer needs and to make sure that they're answering questions even if the customer doesn't know to ask them. I think those things are all really, really important. And then as you're scaling, you're necessarily, to some degree, putting those things at risk, because you're bringing more people in really, really quickly, and you have to kind of bring them up the training curve, and you have to get them into the culture that you've built inside the company, and get them caring as much about the customer experience as everyone else does. So I think you have to try to find balance, because you know that growth is valuable from a business perspective, but also from the ability to impact more customers' perspective. But you also know that if you grow too fast, it puts at risk the customer experiences that got you to where you are. So I think that's a constant balance. It takes a lot of care and attention, and you have to make it the most important part of what you're focused on all the time, because it will drift away from you if you don't.
And one of the coolest things that Carvana has accomplished isn't even going to show up in the balance sheet here anywhere. You call it one of the coolest things that was ever done was around the pandemic, and a moment when the company faced fear and uncertainty and needed to see if your values were real. And you said, turns out they were. You were able to totally sidestep layoffs. The founders quickly cut 80% of hours across all operations and committed their entire salaries, to help cover the difference. And a fund was created to benefit those employees with reduced hours, and more than 500 employees contributed from their salaries to raise millions. As you said, the coolest thing you've ever done.
Yeah, it was, that was a tough time, right? It's easy now for the story of COVID to be, wow, but everyone moved online and that was great for your business. But the story of COVID really was, what is this thing and what is happening? And the NBA and the NFL and all the different professional sports leagues shut down overnight, and all of a sudden we're in lockdown, and what's going on, right? That was the moment where no one knew what was going to happen. And we were a company that was growing at triple-digit rates, and we were positioned for that growth. And we were just entering the time of year when we grow the most. So we had spent the previous 6 months getting ready for that moment of growth, and all of a sudden demand is shut off, right? Because people are in lockdown, and no one is worried about buying a car right now. But we've built this business, and we've got all these people across the country that are positioned to deliver customer experiences, and that's their job, right? And now all of a sudden there's no need for that, because there's not people buying cars. And so we face the same problem that everyone else faced, which is when demand turns off, all of the operators that do all the real actual work, they're suddenly not necessary, and the business is in a place where if you don't have transactions to fund the business, you're going to run out of money, and everyone's going to be in a bad spot. So you don't have any good options, right? And it doesn't feel right that the people that do the work take the brunt of that. But that's what ends up happening, and you understand why it ends up happening, right? Because it's those are the people with the jobs that aren't necessary in that difficult moment. That's why we saw layoffs and furloughs, across the entire company, across the entire economy. But we have this value. We're all in this together, and so I think that everyone has values when moments are good, right? It's like everyone can say all the right things and do all the right things, but when you're afraid and times are tough, that's when values matter, because that's when the signal around you, it's pointing in all these different directions and telling you to do all these different things. You have to have something that anchors you to something bigger than just optimizing for right now. And so we knew what direction all the signals were pointing, but we knew we had this value, we're all in this together. And what I'm really proud of is we took a moment to stop and think about, what does that mean and what do we do? And then we tried to creatively solve it. And so, as you said, we created this fund. And to make a long story short, we did have to cut 80% hours for all operational people across the company to keep the company in a spot where we didn't run out of money and have to turn it all off. And that was tough. But then we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people across the company that put money into this fund. And we ended up, in the end, when all the money went into the fund and we distributed out to the people who lost hours, they ended up making 80% as much as they would have made had we not cut any of their hours. So it ended up just being this awesome success where, we kept those people in a good spot financially. They had benefits all the way through, and they were, they kept getting paychecks. They were a little smaller than they otherwise would have been, but they kept getting paychecks. And then those that could afford it came together as a group of people and adhered to one of our values in a moment of fear. And I just think it was a very human thing, and that's bigger than building a business. It's bigger than selling cars. It was people coming together at a tough time, and I do think that will be the coolest thing that we ever do.
Yeah. A couple of final things. You're not a car guy, are you?
It depends on how you define it, but I drive a Volvo, and outside of the steering wheel, the brake, and the gas, I'm not sure I could name any other parts on the car.
So you don't have some huge car collection?
I don't. No, the Volvo, there's a time for safety, and that time is always.
Amen. Final thing, you're going to turn 40 here in a couple of years, right? And you've already, just based on this last quarter, have achieved a momentous measure of things in the last 8.5 years. What do you want for your 40th birthday related to Carvana?
Related to Carvana. I want...
Or what do you want for your 40th birthday? We can get that out of the way right now, too.
Sure. So I think, what I hope for Carvana is just that we keep pushing. I think we have, achieved a lot by any reasonable measure, but I think there's a lot more to achieve. I think there's a lot more impact to have. I think, part of what all of us want, in this life is to make a little mark on the world. And I think we've made a little mark, but we've got the opportunity to make a much bigger mark. So I just hope we keep moving because, to me, that's what's motivating. It's making progress all the time. And so, I don't think I want anything different for 40 than I wanted for 39 or 38 or whatever the numbers were that came before that. And then I don't know, for the rest of my life, I think I just want what everyone wants. I want my kids to be happy and lead fulfilling lives. I don't know that I've got a ton more than that really seems that important. I hope the world becomes. I hope the world can come together more over the next 10 years than it feels like it's drifted apart over the last 10 years. I think that's an unfortunate thing to watch happen. Everything's getting polarized and people are looking for where everyone else is wrong all the time. And I think that's unfortunate. And I hope that people start to look for what they have in common and where other people are right. So maybe I would ask for that too, but that's a big one to ask for.
Well, you've changed car buying, so we'll work on that one next, Ernie.
Yeah, that's a bigger one.
Ernie Garcia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.